Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed we do. So Trump met with Emmanuel Macron of France yesterday. Lots of news made on Ukraine. So we will break all of that down for you. We also have the very latest in the wars between Elon and the agency heads and OPM and Trump and whatever with regard to this Doge 5-bullet email. So lots of developments there. We'll break that down for you. We also have Apple making a big economic announcement. Is it real, though? Because there are some other counter indicators, I would say, and with regard to the economy with Apple specifically. A lot of developments with regard to Israel that we wanted to get to, including they appear to be annexing a significant part of Syria. So that's a thing that is just happening now. Also tanks rolling through the occupied West Bank. So a lot to focus on there. Huge shakeup at MSNBC. Joy Reid is out. Eamon is getting moved. Jen Psaki is in. Just a lot of shifting of that lineup. And actually, notably, she almost never does this, but Rachel Maddow directly criticizing the network there, specifically with regard to the cancellation of Joy Reid's show. So break that down for you, what it says about that network and where they're heading in the Trump era. And I'm taking a look at, this is an astonishing story. So West Virginia experienced these horrific, historic floods, devastating, 2,000 houses destroyed, 3 people lost their lives, et cetera. They've been begging Trump for an emergency declaration. Still, as of today, they haven't gotten it, which means zero federal help on the ground in West Virginia. These are some of the poorest counties in the country. These are also some of the most Trump-supporting counties in the entire country there. So I'm going to take a look at what is going on there, which I still have a lot of questions about, to be frank with you.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I wasn't even aware of the situation, so I'm excited to hear that monologue. Thanks to all of our premium subscribers for supporting the show, but let's get into it with Ukraine. So there's been some significant developments here. As you said, President Trump meeting yesterday in the Oval Office at the White House with Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron's real mission was to come here and basically just sell Trump on stopping whatever he is doing, but it does not look like that will be successful. Here's a little bit of Donald Trump in the Oval describing this quote-unquote minerals agreement, which we're going to return to in a little bit, that he wants to sign with Ukraine. Let's take a listen.
It looks like we're getting very close. The deal's being worked on, and we're, I think, getting very close to getting an agreement where we get our money back over a period of time. But it also gives us something where I think it's very beneficial to their economy, to them as a country. But, you know, we're in for $350 billion. How we got there, I don't know. But that's a lot of money, a lot of money invested. And we had nothing to show for it. And it was the Biden administration's fault. The Europeans are in for about $100 billion, and they do it as in the form of a loan. And the Europeans have been great on this issue. They understood it wasn't fair, and we were able to work something out.
So that is the description of the quote-unquote minerals agreement. But all of this is all coming back to big war between the Europeans and between Donald Trump in terms of wanting to sign this peace deal with Russia over Ukraine. The Ukraine minerals agreement is kind of secondary to the overall peace deal. The big peace deal is basically negotiations with the Russians, which is currently the Secretary of State and Steve Witkoff have been engaged in to return what it appears to be to the Istanbul framework of April of 2022. So it is interesting because obviously the Europeans are freaking out about that. They do not want to be on the hook for their 30,000 peacekeepers. They're saying, even if we did that, America, you guys still have to pay for it. All of the intelligence, and there's a big war and a feeling of abandonment on the continent. It fits very well with the Germany story that we did yesterday, the new chancellor of Germany saying that we will have to try and have independence from the United States, which is the logical endpoint of a lot of geopolitical forces over the last decades or so.
I mean, it also goes with that. Like some of the numbers and stuff, he just completely makes up. The 350 billion number, the comparison with Europe. Macron actually jumps in. I think we have that.
Yeah, we have that.
And
next.
it's like, let's go ahead and play. He actually jumps in. He's like, well, something, you know, wasn't all just loans. Like we actually, some of that was hard money as well. Let's take a listen to that moment.
Will France support the U.S. being compensated?
I support the idea to have Ukraine first being compensated because they are the one to have lose a lot of their fellow citizens and being destroyed by these attacks. Second, all of those who paid for could be compensated, but not by Ukraine, by Russia, because they were the one to aggress.
Again, just so you understand, Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
Okay.
We have 230 billion frozen assets in Europe, Russian assets, but this is not as a collateral of a loan because this is not our belonging. So they are frozen. If at the end of the day in the negotiation we will have with Russia, they're ready to give it to us, super. It will be loan at the end of the day and Russia will have paid for that.
If you
This is my
believe
wish.
that, it's okay with me. But they get their money back, we don't, and now we do. But, you know, that's
We
only
will fight
fair.
both to
Very weird interpersonal dynamics between these two as well. Very like touchy, a lot of sort of like alpha male positioning and jockeying there, whatever. But, you know, I mean, I have a lot of feelings about this. And number one, I just want the war to end. Like the fact that we are going back to a framework that was originally negotiated at in the very early days of this war. And frankly, I think Ukraine would be very fortunate. We would be very fortunate.
They would be lucky
if they're able to achieve you know, that agreement that was on the table at that point, because if you'll recall, and of course we discussed this ad nauseum here on the show, at that point, Ukraine really did have Russia on the back foot. They really had outperformed. There really was this coalescing of the US and Europe and all these forces behind them. We had just put on this massive amount of sanctions, you know, the like biggest sanction regime in history. It was very uncertain how that was going to go for Russia, et cetera. So the dynamics were a lot more in Ukraine's favor at this point. And so when you think about going back to, like, it's just heartbreaking, the number of people, lives that have been lost, the death and destruction, all because, and this is the part where I get to, like, the way Trump frames this is just, like, wrong and a lie, all because the U.S. wanted to use Ukraine as a proxy in this fight against Russia. That's why that peace deal wasn't pursued. And so, you know, like I said, complicated feel. On the one hand, if he's moving towards ending the war, great, I'm on board with that. Let's do it. On the other hand, like saying that it's Ukraine's fault that the war started, saying we should be reimbursed. No, we're the reason why we pushed them to have this massive war and devastate their population, devastate the country, et cetera. And, you know, of course, I'm also disgusted with just like the naked return to colonialism and imperialism, where it's like, you know, we're going to just make you a, you know, a client state and extract whatever resources we can out of you. And I don't know if you saw this.
But why is that bad?
Russia came in and was like, oh, we have rare earth minerals too. Like maybe, you know, let's cut a deal. And I'll tell you why it's bad is because I believe that these countries should actually have sovereignty. I do actually think that the post-World War II order in which the norm generally followed around the world, in which countries, small countries, are left alone, and where it is, you know, a breach of international law and, you know, something to be guarded against when you have large countries that are just taking advantage of small countries. Like, that's why I think that is a bad direction to go in. But the other thing is that is really unclear to me is, okay, if we strike this like raw earth minerals and their ports and their, you know, oil and gas resources, this across the board 50%, we're basically taking over your state deal. Well, I mean, that doesn't get us less entangled in that region. That gets us more entangled in that region. So I still have a lot of questions about how this is all going to
Well, see, this is where I just totally depart from this like kind of liberal fantasy view of the world. Like, not to go all Howard Zinn, but the idea that the post-World War II order has protected small countries is ridiculous. I mean, if you look, I would borrow some leftist commentary. Take a look at tiny little countries in South America and how independent they've been over the last
No, you're right about
75 years. It's ludicrous. It's all just complete bullshit. And so
But
why
see,
should
this is my issue. Sorry to cut you off. Like, this is, to me, the sort of core ethos of the Trump administration 2.0, not just with regard to foreign affairs, but with regard to domestic affairs too. It's like, okay, well, things are bad and like we've been hypocritical. So instead of trying to improve those international laws, instead of trying to actually act as, you know, moral actors in the world and respect territorial sovereignty, have additional cooperation, et cetera. Instead, it's like, well, things have been bad and we've been hypocritical, so let's just make it worse.
No.
And it's the same thing with regard to, you know, the government here. It's like, well, government has failed you, so let's just strip it down and make it so it can't even deliver your Social Security, Medicare, and the things that it actually does well. So yeah, I you know, reject this return to just naked colonialism and imperialism. And, you know, there are a lot of ways that you can do, there are multiple ways you can do a multipolar world. one of which is to actually have respect for smaller countries around the world, actually to respect territorial integrity, actually to move in the direction of cooperation with large powers. And when Trump says things about like, hey, let's cut the military 50% and strike a deal with Russia and China, that would be a move in that direction. There is no way in hell that I think that is actually what's going to play out here whatsoever. Instead, I think we're headed much more towards like a new imperialism, a new naked, like just we're going to take Greenland, we're going to take Panama, we're going to take Canada, we're going to bomb Mexico, we're going to take Gaza, et cetera, and an increase in militarism and defense spending, very much in line with like, you know, the Cold War hostilities with the Soviet Union.
But this is the thing, we don't have a choice, and all countries in the international system will do what's in their best interest. It's just, again, like a literal liberal fantasy of the 1960s that we could create some grand peace architecture when the United States and the great powers will always rule the world. We're gonna get to this, to the United Nations, and just, again, to show you, there's no such thing as international law. There is no such thing as a UN General Assembly. No one gives a shit what Montenegro thinks, nor should we. All the international system of all time, multipolarity, bipolarity, unipolarity, has always come down to the say of the great powers. It is built into the United Nations that the P5 powers have absolute authority to veto anything. It's actually implicit in the international system that the great victors of World War II will decide the new fate. And so and this idea also that we shouldn't have Ukraine pay us back. I mean, again, you're not wrong.
Pay us back. It's our fault.
Well,
like we should be paying them, to be honest with you, with the death and destruction that we led them into.
Well, again, that's just, again, in my opinion, kind of a ridiculous notion. If you are going to expend $100 billion plus into building this country and ensuring its territorial integrity, the idea that we should not reap the rewards and the benefits of it is insane.
But,
I mean, go back to the Marshall. No, because this is the architecture of the post-World War II era. The Marshall Plan. Who
created these tensions that led to NATO's expansion, that pushed, you know, this direction for Ukraine? Like, we've used them as our toy,
yes,
as our proxy.
But they
also know that.
Yeah, of course, but that's also what they want, right? Zelensky is a willing participant in this.
Paid back when we're a key component, not that Zelensky doesn't have agency, whatever, but we are a key reason why this country has been at war, why Russia invaded this. We are far more responsible for that than Ukraine is. So, you know, again, I want the war to end, but I cannot just sit here and brook this complete inversion of reality in which it's Ukraine's fault that they got invaded by Russia and they somehow owe us something when we're the whole reason why this war wasn't settled years ago in that Istanbul
It's not just us,
process.
It's also the UK, which always seems to get up.
Train,
yeah,
I
think it was mostly us. Yes. I don't agree. That's why I think Biden is terrible. It was an awful president. But if we return to this idea, do you think we did the Marshall Plan out of the goodness of our heart, or did we do it to prop up a democratic Europe, democratic, small d, to do what? So that we could, have a nice big old marketplace over there. We don't do anything out of the goodness of their heart, nor should we. It's a stupid idea. That's not how countries conduct relations with others. If we have now expended over $100+ billion, the United States has depleted its stockpiles and more, that we should just say, deal's done? No. If we're going to ensure your territorial integrity or do this peace deal with Russia, we're going to get something out of it. Whether Ukraine exists has absolutely no import to the United States whatsoever. The only thing that if we're going to get something out of this should of course be to the economic benefit of the United States consumer, which again is the backbone of the US liberal world order. I know people don't like whenever I talk like this. It's the truth, all right? The other people who are telling you about democracy and, NATO, it's all BS completely. What, Latvia matters so much to America? No, it's ludicrous. I mean, these countries are both in the traditional Russian sphere of influence, as you said, with the NATO encroachment on Russian borders and more. The entire idea behind it is a US and European, basically market system, which we use our military power to protect to the benefit of our consumers, of our companies, and of the European companies as well. Let's all just be honest about it. And that's where I have to return to, where when we look at the way that the Ukrainians are complicit in this is that they have wanted since that push for more militarism, for more war. They want to basically, take all of our stockpiles. They want to increase their war with Russia. Their plan from the very beginning is what? Is to draw the United States in. Whatever they're doing is definitely bad for American security interests. And so while, yes, I won't let Biden or Boris Johnson off the hook, the Ukrainians also are, especially the Ukrainian government, has tied itself legally to this framework where they're not allowed to have elections, even though we're protecting democracy. They're not allowed to even negotiate on any territorial integrity according to their own laws. Like, they have locked themselves in to this paradigm. And that's where they have agency, and we also can reset the paradigm of how we conduct relations between states. The ideal foreign policy that I would ever want is exactly this right now. We're meeting with Russia. Ukraine, you're not even there. You know why? Because it's not about you. That's the whole point.
But what happened to them having agency? What happened to it being their fault?
They can do whatever they want inside their country.
But Saagar,
the point is that on the macro level, we will decide what's good for us.
That's my point, is that it's not their fault that we wanted to drag this war out for years. We were the ones who were driving that train. We're the reason why in 2022 in Istanbul, we went in and said, no, we don't want this peace process to continue. It wasn't because of Ukraine. They were at the table negotiating. We covered those negotiations.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Okay, they have desires and agency, and of course, if they're going to be invaded by this nuclear superpower, they want whoever can have their back to have their back. But we are the reason why this has been dragged out for years. And the fact that you have an election, have a new president, doesn't wipe that slate clean and now mean somehow that they owe us. No, they don't. We owe them. That's the truth of the matter if you're actually looking at things from an equitable perspective, because we are the primary reason that they have lost hundreds of thousands of lives and their country has been decimated because we wanted to use them as a plaything in our geopolitical ambitions. That's the truth of the matter. And so this idea that it's Ukraine's fault, that Russia invaded them, I think is a disgusting lie. It's bullshit. It's complete inversion of reality. And also, to frame Zelensky, Trump gets asked another point here. He, had no problem calling Zelensky a quote unquote dictator, even though he was democratically elected. And yes, I agree with you, they should have elections. Although I'm also sympathetic to the argument they make that, like, hey, it's kind of hard to have elections when you've got millions of people who have fled the country and people who are displaced and parts of the country that we're not even sure whether they're us or Russia at this point. But yes, they should have elections. But he was not willing to say Putin was a dictator, but he's perfectly comfortable saying Zelensky's a dictator. So again, listen, I want this war to end, but I also we have to exist in some sort of reality-based framework here. And he has completely inverted what actually happened in this war and the entire trajectory of it.
Look, again, to return. Now, is Putin a dictator? I can say that, yes. Do you know why it's a bad idea, for example, for the president of the United States to call a Russian nuclear superpower, the leader of that country, a dictator or a war criminal, I dare say, like maybe Joe Biden, is because we have to conduct relations with these great powers. Now, is Russia like a preeminent superpower? No, but it's a nuclear armed power, and its military has already, dramatically increased its power and its size to the point where even the so-called great powers of Europe are unable, by their own admission, to even keep up with them from a war production level. In general, it's a good idea to just make sure that things are on balance. That's really what pisses people off. And this is what I just don't get. Liberals really would rather live in a world where we vote correctly in the UNGA and don't call Zelensky a dictator than to have peace. Peace is not only the ultimate element.
Zelensky a dictator
because he doesn't matter. He's irrelevant. That's my point.
But it's also just a lie. And so that's why because I care, because having reality and like factual accuracy is something that I think we should all care about. I mean, to turn Ukraine, which was truly a victim of this circumstance, into like they're the aggressor, and to say that, oh, Russia, it's not Russia's fault that they invaded this country. Like, it's number one, Russia's fault. It's number two, our fault. And it has really very little to do with it being the Ukrainians' fault. And no, I'm not going to just sit by and say, like, it's fine to just make up this preposterous upside down worldview. And I don't even see how that actually helps in these negotiations either, because your goal in the negotiations, since Russia was the aggressor, And you don't want to have countries just willy-nilly taking over other countries, because that leads to more war and more death and more destruction and more devastation and us getting entangled in more places. By the way, what you would ideally want is the best possible deal you can achieve at this point on the Ukrainian side. To me, going into this, calling Zelensky dictator, throwing him under the bus, signaling you aren't going to call Putin a dictator, that you're going to side with them even in their preposterous narrative of how this war unfolded and somehow make it about like Ukrainian aggression, is insane and completely gives up any leverage you have to try to secure the best deal you can for Ukraine, which would be the most just outcome.
See, that's a presumption that you made that is incorrect, is that why should we care about securing the best deal for Ukraine? That's Ukraine's problem. We should secure the best deal for us. And that is exactly how countries should conduct international relations. Ukraine's job is to push for its own interests. Congratulations to you. I actually think they've done a pretty good job. I mean, they've got to save 80% of their country, 20% of their country is controlled by Russia. They literally get to live and exist. That's your victory. They refuse to acknowledge that victory when you're up against a nuclear armed power. Our job is to do what is best for us and for our quote unquote allies. Ukraine, what kind of ally is this? Is currently always asking us for money and to embroil our nuclear arsenal on their side, to give them NATO umbrella. Like, this is not something that is beneficial to us whatsoever. Not to mention how much money we have all paid in extra gas because of these Russian sanctions. But to return to that spring 2022 framework, Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's friend, envoy extraordinaire from Israel, Gaza, now involved in this, is now talking specifically about the Istanbul framework as one that he would like to see in the deal. Let's take a listen.
They are responsive to an end to this. There were very, very, what I'll call cogent and substantive negotiations framed in something that's called the Istanbul Protocol Agreement. We came very, very close to signing something, and I think we'll be using that framework as a guidepost to get a peace deal done between Ukraine and Russia, and I think that will be an amazing day.
So there you go. So the Istanbul framework of spring of 2022, which you previously mentioned, that is important because that's the deal that was on the table, of which Boris Johnson basically went over to Kiev on behalf of Joe Biden and was like, yeah, don't do this. Actually, we're going to be behind you this entire time. And it leads to this complete quagmire. So I'm not letting Joe Biden or Boris Johnson or Emmanuel Macron, any of these NATO leaders, off the hook. But we are where we are right now. So how do we deal with this? And so the way that we deal with it is end it as soon as possible. It's bad for us. It's bad for them. It's bad for the Russians, too, just in terms of, let's put it this way. Is it good for us to have an isolated Russia with a war economy that is booming, war production more than the United States and NATO combined? That sounds bad to me. So whatever we can do to try and bring that temperature down and just make sure that we're not having this not only ongoing land war, humanitarian disaster, but just geopolitical tension rise, again, over a country which is completely irrelevant to the United States, yeah, I think that's overall a good thing. And I mean, this is also where we have a bit of a binary choice here. We had Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and all of them who genuinely did not want peace in Ukraine. They wanted this war to go on forever. And then we have whatever the hell this is, realism with the Trump flavor, the Trump doctrine, whatever the fuck it is, that we can describe it. I'm going to choose the latter. I mean, I think the latter is far preferable. If the war ends, and especially if the U.S. taxpayer, or at least U.S. consumer, is benefited in some way, that seems to be somewhat more of a net positive than whatever the hell we were doing over the last 3 years. And I think that, honestly, I think this will be tremendously popular if it comes to fruition. The only, I would say, counter to all of this is the problems that could be sidelined in the rare earth minerals deal that you talked about. Let's put that on the screen, for example. So here we have the actual text of the rare earth minerals deal, quote, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, under which the U.S. would express its desire to keep Ukraine free, sovereign, and secure, according to this draft, which is obtained by Axios. The Ukrainian deal would effectively allow U.S. investment in Ukrainian mineral companies with some sort of split guaranteed in the future. As you said, the Russians are also saying, hey, we've also got a ton of rare earth minerals, which apparently on paper is correct. I did not know that in terms of what their rare earth mineral stocks and all of that.
Ryan was right when he was like, these rare earths turn out to not be so rare.
He is right. Yeah. He's like, they're in Mexico, they're in Chile,
we actually have
China,
huge deposits
Ukraine,
here now.
Afghanistan.
And I also read that Ukraine is a little bit overselling their rare earth situation. But that's why it's important to understand some news outlet, I can't remember which one, got their hands on the deal that was proposed. And it was not just rare earth mineral. It was basically all of Ukraine's primary economic activity, including their ports, their oil and gas, their quote unquote rare earth minerals, which also, by the way, like which rare earths have been important, have shifted over time as well. So in any case, yeah, if some sort of deal like this actually goes down, then it means we are obligated to Ukraine forever. Because you don't think we're going to protect those economic interests and be committed to protect those economic interests? Of course we are.
Its desire to keep Ukraine free, sovereign, and secure. Desire is different than the guarantee of their security, which is the actual opposite of what we should ever get ourselves into. It's nice to have a free and a sovereign and secure Ukraine. It's nice to have a lot of things. Honestly, the text of that deal is perfect. It's like, yeah, we can express a rhetorical desire to have something, but we don't have to do anything about it. And that's the problem I have with what Zelensky ultimately wants. He wants, not only he, let's be honest, a lot of the Ukrainian people now, they think they belong in NATO. They think they're entitled to our security umbrella, to us having to trigger Article 5 on their behalf. Sorry, never gonna happen. Like, already, not only have you been invaded, 20% of your country there, in terms of the historical spheres of influence and in terms of the actual economic and security benefit of adding this gigantic territory to our security umbrella and our further interests. I mean, this would only further embroil us into the affairs of the continent, which is less and less and less important every day to the United States economy and to the United States security. So overall, the text or whatever of this deal, which is not one that secures any need, right, legally or whatever for the U.S. to get involved here while reaping some economic benefit, that's the best you could possibly get.
But Saagar, why do you think that Zelensky is proposing this? It's because he knows if we have significant economic interests in the country, then we are going to defend those economic interests.
But then we can make a choice.
And especially we're talking about, this is going to be some of Trump's billionaires' buddies that propose this, that want to get their claws into the Ukrainian economy, et cetera. And so that's the whole reason why Zelensky is open to this, is because he sees that as a way of guaranteeing that we stay embroiled in this country, that we keep these interests there and that we will defend them if they are encroached upon. He sees it as being sort of like a security guarantee.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but the thing is that then actually prove it, become important to us. If you are, then yeah, maybe we'll defend you. But for right now, I mean, if you just looked at the bilateral trade we had with Ukraine, we're doing 4 times more trade with Brazil. We're doing 4 times more trade with multiple other countries than we do with Ukraine and Israel, by the way, if we all want to talk on those terms. But of course, nobody who's pushing this peace deal wants to see anything like that. My only point is that as we continue to go down this, we are marching towards, in my opinion, a good outcome, which is a rejection of this rhetoric-based international order. Because it's not rules-based, it's rhetoric-based. Let's put the next one up there because this affirms that. The U.S. actually voted against a UN resolution, quote, condemning Russia for the Ukraine war. But this is why, again, I want to return to the point that the great powers rule the world. So there's a lot made of this from the pro-Ukrainian side. They're like, oh my God, 93 different countries voted in favor of this, 18 against, and 65 abstained. Well, the people who voted against it are the US and Russia. China abstained, and so did India. So the world's largest population abstained. The second world's population abstained. 2 out of the 5 P5 powers voted against it. So whatever these 93 other countries say, cool, nice. Thank you for your words of affirmation. It doesn't matter. And that's my point around international law or the UN or any of these other resolutions. Complete crap. I mean, and this is something where you just have to return to the preference, in my opinion, from what I can see from these liberals, is literally rhetoric as opposed to a result. And the result is obvious, no matter what, even if it was literal Ukraine vassalage. If you wanted a, quote, independent Ukraine, or at least of Russia, how is that not preferable than the continuing, ongoing march to death of the entire Ukrainian population, its state, its economy, and everything? The idea that it was just going to emerge as some, new Brussels or something is obviously not going to happen. And so, I don't know. I find there's just so much fake idealism, that has been baked into this, both right and left, by the way, that comes into this, which is falling apart on its own merits. And I think that is a necessary event for a more stable international outcome in the future.
Well, what I will just say is this. First of all, as I explained before, I don't think the answer to us having been hypocritical or, things being not great in the international order is to just say, so let's just do total barbarism and might makes right and, conquest here and there and everywhere else and more militarism and likely more aggressive Cold War posture towards China, et cetera. I don't think that is the correct direction to go in, number one. And number two, you can't ignore the fact, we take for granted now that all of these European nations can coexist peacefully. That has not been the historical track record. And in fact, the architecture that was set up after World War II, which, by the way, was set up to serve our interests primarily, but also was quite effective at making sure that there were not repeated constant wars on the European continent. In fact, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is the largest land war in Europe since World War II. So it's, it's not like it didn't accomplish anything. It actually was quite successful in that way. And could it have been better? Could we have certainly the Cold War era use of all of these smaller countries in proxy wars against the Soviet Union and the, obsessive, have to get rid of any communist regime whatsoever. That was the wrong way to approach multipolarity. And frankly, I think that's exactly the direction that we are headed back in with the Trump administration.
Yeah, I hear that
we
a
will
lot.
see.
But the point, the reason why that mattered in the past, these European states warring they were the bedrock of the global system and of the global economy. They're irrelevant today.
It still matters if they go to war with each other.
If they go to war with each
obviously.
other, that's their problem. The only reason, why did the United States get involved in World War I, right? It's let's all be really honest about it. It was about the attacking of the Lusitania and about the, that was a pretext. And then us getting involved was to basically Bigfoot the European powers and say, no, we're the ones actually who are going to be in charge. Why? Because we want the spoils of the international system. After World War II, we become the preeminent guarantor of the West and of the rules-based international order. The Soviets get their side of it, which again is about a complete division of the world for market-based purposes. Europe will no longer even be 50% of global GDP by 2030. Its irrelevance to the global affairs is dramatic compared to how it was in 100 years ago or even 75 years ago. So if there's a war between Latvia and Estonia, it doesn't matter at all.
But Saagar, you're missing my point a little bit, which isn't that, Europe is the most important region on the planet right now or whatever. My point is that you dismiss that international architecture that was set up after World War II as being fake and a waste of time and not accomplishing anything.
Well, I think it's
and
outdated.
that's just not true. That's just not true. That architecture actually did service for years, even though, I think, again, the way we approach multipolarity with the Cold War was deeply destructive and led to that incredibly hypocritical approach, which ultimately leads to the downfall of all of this. But that international architecture that was set up, it did its job in terms of preventing wars, additional wars in Europe. So, to say that, none of this is possible and we can't do any better than just barbarism and conquest and taking over whatever countries we feel like taking over, I don't think that is the case if you look at the historical record.
My point is that was an outdated model for an outdated market, which does not exist anymore. The United States is an Asian power and is one where its destiny, for both on a consumer at a technological level, will be accomplished there. No, there's not a single single serious economist who would even dispute that. Even Obama had the whole quote unquote pivot to Asia. This has been on paper, if you just look at it as a balance sheet and take out everybody's nice little vacations to Munich or to Italy or whatever, it's obvious. And my point is that overcommitting to this European security and fetishizing it as some great, incredible thing, just because we did it 60 years ago, we should continue to do it today, which is mostly the argument, if you really look at it on a merit level, for why we should be so supportive of Ukraine, is bad for the overall U.S. interest. Now, I know the whole barbarism and all of that, again, like what? You think other countries don't operate that way? Like, in a certain sense, there's a Thucydides trap. There always will be with the way that great powers function inside of the system. In a sense, you don't have any choice. And beyond that, when we talk about how the United States has conducted itself, it has always been this way. It's just been rhetorically dressed up. It's not just us, all these other countries. Like when China wants to, justify its expansion, it does so in the same rhetoric of like in criticism of Western rules-based international order. When Russia invades Ukraine, how do? They do it in a criticism, again, as if they're the ones who are being encroached upon. They don't just outwardly say, we want, oil or whatever, or it used to be ours and so thus we deserve it. That's basically their argument, which is stupid, but that's what it all comes down to. And so honesty in the international system. Let's say you were talking there about Russia and China and the United States, this idea of a meeting. It will not happen in the rhetoric that you're describing. The only way it would happen is to be like, all right, let's all be honest here. Who needs what? How is it going to happen? And you know who we borrow this from? This is the great irony. This is what the European powers did. Before World War I, they carved up the world because they were the guarantors of security with the might and the ability to enforce those borders. And there actually was a period of some relative peace on the continent.
And then there was World War I.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I didn't say every system is perfect. But I mean, it always breaks down because things change.
Here's what I would say, and then we can move on, which is that when we have pursued what we perceive to be in our just total naked self-interest. For example, when we went into Iraq, those things have ended up being a disaster.
Well, I would flip it. I actually don't think that was for our self-interest. And that was part of the problem.
Of course, I mean, that I think we clearly went in to secure natural resources, just as we're now talking about being in Ukraine forever to secure natural resources, just like we're talking about being in Greenland, in Panama, in Gaza, to secure our own naked self-interest. And so what I would say is that I don't think that that is, number one, beneficial to America in the long term whatsoever. And number two, I certainly don't think it's good for, the people of those countries who are getting blown up and having their societies destroyed. And the amount of blowback that we've seen from that hypocritical adventurism where we were really nakedly pursuing our self-interest, no matter what language we, wrapped it around democracy or markets or whatever, where we really were just nakedly pursuing our self-interest. The amount of blowback from that has been utterly catastrophic for us. So pursuing it, more nakedly without any veneer of democracy, it doesn't improve the fact that this has led us. That is a big part of the decline of this country, is that adventurism and is that naked pursuit of our own self-interest, which has led to massive blowback for our own country and created more horror, more barbarism, more terror, more danger, all of that.
My last word would be, I would dispute that the second Iraq War was a war of national interest. And that's exactly why it was such a terrible idea. It was born of an ideological obsession with nation building. And yes, securing the oil was also a great, it didn't even work out, ironically. The Chinese currently control the oil market out of Iraq. But if we look in the past at both Vietnam and the second Iraq War, those were ideological projects not born of national interest. They basically fused ideology with, well, it's in the U.S. interest to make sure South Vietnam is democracy. It sounds so insane.
The domino effect.
Some 70
that's how they thought of it, as being in the national interest.
My point is that if you actually had a true balance sheet analysis of that, which many realists at the time of both Iraq and of Vietnam said, you would never do it. And actually, they would be better off, and so would we. And so if we pursue things that are openly from a position of national interest and don't let ourselves get sucked down the trap of democracy or human rights or stopping communism, or we can't let the smoking gun be a mushroom cloud, then we will be better off overall. This this is kind of a Kissingerian view of the world, which I agree with 100%. And it was one where if we had pursued that, we would be richer, we'd be more prosperous, those people would be better off, and we would be better off. So you can read it two different ways, but I would read them much more of mistakes of ideology rather than of mistakes of national interest. I would say when the United States works in its national interest, it actually works out pretty damn well. And it's when we depart from that, like our stupid experiments in Cuba and in the Philippines, when we just want to like appear, like one of the great powers, or whenever we pursue, this land war in Asia against Vietnam, or invade Iraq for no purpose, literally whatsoever. That's when we lose our treasure. That's exactly how the Roman Empire went astray as well.
For example, wanting to take over Gaza. I mean, that's the
I
problem.
agree. It's
I know
stupid.
you do.
We're
but
doing that on behalf of the Israelis, not for us.
That's the problem, is that the way you might calculate that balance sheet as you described it is not, there's no like universal way to calculate that.
Yeah, that's
and
the
so,
democracy.
Trump is looking at it and his calculation is, we should have 50% of Ukraine, which again obligates us to Ukraine forever. We should take over Greenland. We should take over Panama. We should take over Canada. We should bomb Mexico. We should do total ethnic cleansing and genocide in Gaza and take that over because that'll be good for our interests. That's what I'm saying, is that when you are unconstrained by anything and it's just purely might makes right, what you're going to end up with is a lot of disastrous foreign adventurism that both is bad for our country, but also, yes, I do care about the fact that, it leads to mass slaughter and devastation and horror for people in other countries around the world too, like the Palestinians, for example.
I think that's fair. I understand how you got there. I just think, and look, you're right in terms of the balance sheet. Many people disagree with me. All the libs in my neighborhood, they will tell you Ukraine is a vital national interest and they can express their wish at the ballot box, if they will. This is just an argument that I made. This view is not popular in Washington. It is really not actually all that popular in America. Most Americans like to truss up, their foreign policy in some sort of doing good in the world. It's how we basically sold
because humans
World War II.
want to believe that they can make the world like that. We don't have to accept naked barbarism, colonialism, imperialism, that things can be improved. Like they have a basic belief in the power of human beings to improve civilization. And instead what we're seeing is just a return to, well, actually we're just going to go back to pure resource grabs, that we feel like doing, and adventurism around the world wherever we feel like doing it.
I think the nightmare scenario is that doing that would actually lead to a more stable scenario. Now, of course, as I said, the big risk to that is Gaza, because that is the definition of doing something outside your own national interest and for literally another nation's interest, which we will get to later on in the show. So why don't we just end it there?
All right.
It's been a good discussion.
Yes.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.